Since last time we talked about the books that I don't always enjoy, even though sometimes I do, today I've decided I'll tell you about my top favorite books of all time. I recommend everyone to think about it, especially if you're a writer, because when I was compiling this list, I actually found out a lot about myself as a reader and a writer, about the genres and the tropes and the voices that I enjoy. And it was no surprise that my top genre is fantasy. I knew that. But I was really surprised by the fact that realistic fiction is my next top genre. What is even more surprising, considering that I'm writing fantasy YA, is that my top three YA titles, the only YA titles that I have on this list, are all realistic fiction. It's crazy. And not only they're all realistic fiction, they basically sound as if it's the same author, maybe even writing the same book. So what I've decided I'll do today, I will read the opening paragraph of each book to you so that you can hear the voice, because the voice is the major factor for me. It needs to sound right. So it's either the voice of the narrator if we are having the first person point of view, or sometimes it's the voice of the author if we are having the third person POV. So let's start with children's, well, middle grade, and go all the way up to adults. The first book on this list is going to be The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, so let's hear how it starts. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they do not come into the story much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair which grew over most of his face as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening, when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. We've got C.S. Lewis here, and the second book on this list is The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. There was a hand in the darkness, and it held a knife. The knife had a handle of polished black bone, and a blade finer and sharper than any razor. If it sliced you, you might not even know you had been cut, not immediately. The knife had done almost everything it was brought to that house to do, and both the blade and the handle were wet. The street door was still open, just a little, where the knife and the man who held it slipped in, and wisps of nighttime mist slithered and twined into the house through the open door. The man Jack paused on the landing. With his left hand he pulled a large white handkerchief from the pocket of his black coat, and with it he wiped off the knife and his gloved right hand, which had been holding it. Then he put the handkerchief away. The hunt was almost over. He had left the woman in her bed, the man on the bedroom floor, the older child in her brightly colored bedroom, surrounded by toys and half-finished models. That only left the little one. The third book is The Hero from Otherwhere by J. Williams, and that's an older one. It was published in 1972, and I read it because we had this fantasy edition which was double-sided. So on one side of the book was this story in Russian, I read it in Russian, and on the other side of the book there was the, what is it called? It was by Ursula Le Guin, and it was one of the books of Earthsea. So I think that one, let me take a look. So that one was the first one. It was A Wizard of Earthsea. So that one I love too. I did not put it as my favorite. I don't know why. I guess like it's on top there. It's one of the books I enjoy, and I enjoy this author and her writing style. But for some reason, there is some comfort that this book brings me. And for that reason, it's among the top ones for me. It was a case of hate at first sight. The Rosens had moved to Brixton when Mr. Rosen was transferred to a new job there. Jesse had been unhappy at leaving his friends and doubly unhappy at leaving the village on the shore and moving to a town inland, even though Brixton was small enough so that a 10-minute walk took you into farmland and woods. However, he started school as cheerfully as he could, and in general got along well. But on his second day, trying to find the gym with his arms full of books, he came face to face with Rich Dennison. Literally face to face. Rich came running around a corner and they smacked into each other, almost bumping foreheads. Jesse's books went flying. He glared at the other boy. Rich was as thick and solid as Jesse was wiry. He had shaggy black hair and what looked like one eyebrow running across both eyes. He had a sullen, heavy expression, and the word that came into Jesse's mind was gorilla. The fourth book in the middle grade category that I love, that's one of my top, is The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. Yes, there is a witch in the woods. There has always been a witch. Will you stop your fidgeting for once, my stars? I have never seen such a fidgety child. No, sweetheart, I have not seen her. No one has. Not for ages. We've taken steps so that we will never see her. Terrible steps. Don't make me say it. You already know anyway. Oh, I don't know, darling. No one knows why she wants children. We don't know why she insists that it must always be the very youngest among us. It's not as though we could just ask her. She hasn't been seen. We make sure that she will not be seen. Of course she exists. What a question. Look at the woods. So dangerous. Poisonous smoke and sinkholes and boiling geysers and terrible dangers every which way. Do you think it is so by accident? Rubbish. It was the witch. And if we don't do as she says, what will become of us? And the last book in this category, you will never guess what it is. Dun, dun, dun. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Mr. and Mrs. Darcy of number 4, Private Drive, were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Darcy was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Darcy was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Darsleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion there was no finer boy anywhere. The Darsleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. So I thought of every title, and I thought if I had to describe it in just 2 or 3 words, and sometimes one, what words would I use for this voice and for the style and for the book in general? And I came up with this. For graveyard book, I would call it mysterious and quirky. Harry Potter, mysterious and quirky and yet simple. Hero from Otherwhere, it's simple and down to earth. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, simple and quirky. And for The Girl Who Drank the Moon, it would be mysterious and quirky. So it's apparent that my taste in middle grade has these qualities. It has to be simple or mysterious or quirky, and ideally it would combine all of these in some capacity. And all of the books are in the fantasy genre. So for middle grade, fantasy is absolutely my top genre. Let's move on to YA, where the situation is completely different, and it took me by surprise. I was so surprised because I thought it would also have fantasy genre as the top genre, but it's all in the realistic fiction genre. And we're gonna start with The Perks of Being a Wallflower. August 25, 1991. Dear friend, I'm writing to you because she said you listen and understand and didn't try to sleep with that person at that party, even though you could have. Please don't try to figure out who she is, because then you might figure out who I am, and I really don't want you to do that. I will call people by different names or generic names because I don't want you to find me. I didn't enclose a return address for the same reason. I mean nothing bad by this, honest. I just need to know that someone out there listens and understands and doesn't try to sleep with people even if they could have. I need to know that these people exist. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap, but I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. In the first place, that stuff bores me. And in the second place, my parents would have about 2 hemorrhages apiece if I told anything pretty personal about them. They're quite touchy about anything like that, especially my father. They're nice and all, I'm not saying that, but they're also touchy as hell. Besides, I'm not going to tell you my whole goddamn autobiography or anything. I'll just tell you about this madman stuff that happened to me around last Christmas, just before I got pretty run down and had to come out here and take it easy. Note how I didn't even announce the second book, which is The Catcher in the Rye, because honestly, all 3 books sound as if they could be the same book, I swear. It's just mind-blowing to me that these are my favorite books, and I didn't even realize that this is one voice that I absolutely worship. The voice that I would call candid and down to earth. The third book in this YA category is The Outsiders, so here it goes. When I stepped out into the bright sunlight from the darkness of the movie house, I had only 2 things on my mind: Paul Newman and a ride home. I was wishing I looked like Paul Newman. He looks tough and I don't, but I guess my own looks aren't so bad. I have light brown, almost red hair and greenish gray eyes. I wish they were more gray because I hate most guys that have green eyes, but I have to be content with what I have. My hair is longer than a lot of boys wear theirs, squared off in back and long at the front and sides, but I am a greaser, and most of my neighborhood rarely bothers to get a haircut. Besides, I look better with long hair. I had a long walk home and no company, but I usually loan it anyway, for no reason except that I like to watch movies undisturbed, so I can get into them and leave them with the actors. When I see a movie with someone, it's kind of uncomfortable, like having someone read your book over your shoulder. As I was compiling this list, I realized that in the YA category, the type of the character is a young man, a teenage boy, with difficult life. For some reason, this voice of that troubled boy in difficult circumstances speaks to me, mind to mind, soul to soul. Like I can feel it, and there's something about it that I really love. So I think there's a mental note I'm taking here that even though the book I'm currently writing is nothing like that, maybe my next project I should attempt something like this since this is so dear to me. Now for my final favorite in the adult category, I'm gonna pay homage to my home country and give you one title from Russian literature that is my favorite. I do enjoy a lot of Russian classics. We read a lot of that in school, and I loved analyzing the characters and the themes in the books and everything. And I do like a lot of other adult titles. I enjoy Leanne Moriarty, for example, because I feel like she's writing characters in a way that's very true to life and in situations that a lot of people face in life. So I enjoy her books. I enjoy in the fantasy genre Game of Thrones, for example. I enjoyed the Sympathizer, which was a recent Pulitzer winner, I believe. I enjoy a lot of books, but it's hard for me to pick a favorite because adult literature is not my priority. It's not my top category. So with YA and middle grade, I mean, it's much easier, but with adults, not so easy. So I've decided to go with Russian classics. And I have the translation on the screen, but I'm gonna read it in Russian just to make it a little more authentic. Однажды весною, в час небывало жаркого заката, В Москве на Патриарших прудах появились два гражданина. Первый из них, одетый в летнюю серенькую пару, был маленького роста, упитан, лыс, свою приличную шляпу пирожком нес в руке, а на хорошо выбритом лице его помещались сверхъестественных размеров очки в черной роговой оправе. Второй, плечистый, рыжеватый, вихрастый молодой человек, заломленный на затылок клетчатой кепке, был в ковбойке, жеваных белых брюках и в черных тапочках. Первый был никто иной, как Михаил Александрович Берлиоз, председатель правления одной из крупнейших московских литературных ассоциаций, сокращенно именуемой «Массолит», и редактор толстого художественного журнала. А молодой спутник его – поэт Иван Николаевич Панырев, пишущий под псевдонимом Бездомный. So this book, if you ever decide to read it either in translation or in the original, it's definitely mysterious and quirky and imaginative. And it's kind of like magical realism, almost in a fantasy genre. So it's close to what I love in the middle grade category. So that is interesting. But I absolutely love it. I love to reread it, and I think it's a great book that I can proudly share. These are my top favorites across all ages. It was really interesting to look into my favorites and to realize there's so many connections, and that I really appreciate two specific types of text. It's either mysterious and quirky, or it's very simple, down to earth, a conversation you would have with somebody close, or somebody maybe not close, somebody who maybe you met for the first time, but now you're going into this deep conversation and you're really connecting on this human level, soul to soul, and you really feel close to them. I've had those conversations in my life. So, and these were the moments that I really cherished. And so I think that's why this type of literature speaks to me, even though I'm mostly leaning towards the fantasy genre and toward a little bit of mystery and a little bit of curiosity. So anyway, these are my favorites. Share your favorites. If you ever make a video like this, I would love to watch it, because that's not an easy task, out of everything you read ever in your life, to pick your top 3 or 5 or 10 favorites. But I think it's very worth it, especially if you're a writer, because they can tell you a lot about yourself. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!